A young artist is inspired by one of the muses of Greek mythology to help an old clarinet player open a new club in an abandoned building. A young nurse is inspired by Jesus to commit a little soul-saving and self-mutilation along with other eerie endeavors. What could Robert Greenwald's Xanadu and Rose Glass's St. Maud possibly have in common? That's what we're discussing in this episode of The Celluloid Mirror.
I mean, what do you think? You think they stand a chance? Well, you're on their side, aren't you? Who are you betting on,
Magic mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest one of all?
Look at these lies.
One shall stand, one shall fall.
Even if one of them survives,
the only way to stop him is to make another movie.
Welcome to the Celluloid Mirror. I am one of your hosts, Sean Mannion.
And I am Nicole Solomon, the other one of your hosts. On the Celluloid Mirror, we take two films and look at what they reflect about each other, the audience, and our culture at large. And today we are talking about Rose Glass's St. Maud, as well as Robert Greenwald's Xanadu.
We'll start by giving a brief synopsis of each film, discuss our response to the film's critical response, and then dive in on what the films say about each other. But first, we have a very special guest on today's episode, Nicole. Did you notice we're not alone?
Oh my God.
Surprise!
Oh. This is terrifying.
Coming out of the walls like Olivia Newton-John.
Oh my God. Does this mean we're all going to be mused and have our creativity just swell? And this is amazing.
I hope so. Or we're all going to get animated by Don Bluth. I don't know. Either one is good.
Either one. I'd take either one. But thank you so much for appearing here to Alanah Rafferty, who is a filmmaker, producer, voiceover artist, and host of the Blev podcast.
Believe.
Oh, host of. Thank you. I was like, that's not the name of your podcast, Alanah. I got very confused because I did not prepare for this podcast.
Yeah,
host
no
of
worries.
Thank you. Host of the Believe podcast, Girl Presses Play. Her latest film, Fraud, will be making its debut at the Tribeca Film Festival on June 10th, and the next season of her podcast starts streaming this September. She will also be starring as the lead in my and Sean's animated horror comedy, Reveal. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Alanah.
Thank you for having me. I'm super pumped to be here.
Yay. Sean and I were on Alanah's podcast a little while ago talking about Blood Simple and A Woman, a Gun, and a Noodle Shop.
Yeah, that was a fun one. That was a really fun one.
It was very fun. For our listeners, Alanah's show Girl Presses Play is similar in some ways to the Celluloid Mirror in that it's she's taking two films and discussing them together, but that yours I think is less about two films you would never expect going together, and more you've been doing like films and their remakes, or at least that's what you were doing last season.
Season 2 was like films and their remakes, and then season 1 was more of kind of about like exploring each genre, just for film folks who don't necessarily have like a working definition of each genre for film specifically. So I like to keep it just generally film critique, because then it kind of allows the podcast to be like whatever we want it to be, if that makes sense. So I try to keep it loose, keep it fun, keep it film nerdy.
Do you have any little previews for season 3 and what we can expect your particular angle to be next time?
Season 3 has been announced. It's going to be all about superhero films and the history of superhero films, which goes back a lot earlier than you think it would have. It actually goes back to pre-World War II with this film, The Shadow, which was kind of fun to start digging into and researching, because The Shadow basically serves as the main basis for Batman.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really interesting to like watch that film. And then I think like a week and a half later, I went and saw Matt Reeves as the Batman, and to see the kind of parallels between the two, I thought was really, really interesting. And also just seeing a lot of films I'd never seen before. I know this is crazy. I've never seen Richard Donner's Superman.
Oh, okay.
Until this year, which my boyfriend was like, "You what?" But yeah, we're just going to be kind of like tracing the history of specifically superhero films and seeing how that kind of affects not only the way that superhero films are made, but also just how films are made and how people's expectations for films are kind of changed because of how, what's the word I'm looking for, prolific they've become in the last, I'd say, 20 to 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. In many ways, they're the dominant form of commercial film right now.
Yeah, I read somewhere, I think James Gunn said this, that they're almost like the Westerns of our day, like how in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, everyone and their mother is doing a Western, and now these days it's like everyone and their mother is doing a Marvel or a DC film.
Yeah.
That is a very interesting point that I will not go down a rabbit hole about because we're not here today to discuss superhero films and Westerns, fascinating as I'm finding that parallel right now. We're here to talk about Xanadu and Saint Maud, right?
Yeah, we're talking about supernatural, not superheroes today.
Mm-hmm.
Supernatural, not superheroes. Should we do synopses of these films?
Are you desperate to do one of the synopses, Nicole?
I would like to, despite the fact that I just watched both of these films last night as a double feature to prep for this podcast, I would love to not do the synopsis of Xanadu because I do not want to be responsible for explaining what the fuck happens in that movie. So
very simple. I can explain that.
Sure. You want to explain Xanadu, Sean?
I can.
Since you're in Xanadu right now, apparently our listeners can't see.
I am Xanadu. My heart is Xanadu.
Sean has, for our listeners at home, a Max Headroom Zoom background right now that looks quite a bit like parts of Xanadu, just so everyone knows.
And if people are Patreon patrons, they can see it when we do when we release the video form of the podcast. Would you like to explain Saint Maud to people, Alanah?
Sure, why not?
Cool. All right, I'll launch into Xanadu, and then you can take off in that with Saint Maud. So Xanadu is about a young artist named Sonny, and he seems really frustrated with that he couldn't make it on his own as just an artist, because apparently it didn't just magically happen and he has to work for it. So he resentfully is like going into work where he paints recreations of album art, large, to be hung on the side of buildings, I guess. I think it's an advertising thing. So, he's really upset about getting paid for that. And of course, he can't do his own art on the side while getting paid, apparently. Anyway, so we got this kid, Sonny, and one day he's frustrated and he tears up some work that he was doing that actually looked quite nice, throws it into the wind, and that somehow activates a painting on the side of, down an alley of all of the muses of Greek mythology, and they all leave the painting. Among them is Olivia Newton-John, who is Kira, and Sonny subsequently sees her while he's out and about, and she rolls up to him on her roller skates and kisses him, and then rolls away, and then he starts chasing after her. There's this mysterious girl, and somewhere not long after that, he is on the beach and runs across a clarinet player named Danny McBride, I think is what his name
McGuire,
was. McGuire.
Wait,
Danny McGuire.
McBride?
Danny McBride's the actor, isn't he?
That's somebody else.
Yeah. So Danny McGuire, this clarinet player who's just hanging out on the beach playing his clarinet. They become pals, and in the beginning here, Sonny keeps seeing Olivia Newton-John on her roller skates, and then as he becomes pals with Danny, he sees in a old book Danny has of his days being in a big band that there is a girl from back then who is a singer in the band who looks exactly like Kira. Anyway, he and Danny become good friends, and then he finally like catches up to Kira, and they have a very sort of flirtatious relationship, especially as she leads him to this old abandoned building, and later as he's hanging out with Danny just mentions how he used to run clubs, and it'd be nice to do a club again, but we'd have to find a place. And it clicks for Sonny. Hey, I found a place. There's this abandoned building. So inspired by Kira, he's in love with Kira. He's inspired by her. They convert this abandoned building into a new club called Xanadu. And just before it's about to open, they're about to have their big opening night. Kira reveals, I can't stick around, man. I'm a muse. And like, I have to go. I have to go be a muse for other people. And Sonny, doesn't like that. And he says, no, you got to stay with me, blah, blah, blah. Especially after she proves that, no, I'm really a supernatural being, using the dictionary, where she inserts words into the dictionary to say, like, do you believe me now? And then makes the TV talk to him, and he's still a little dubious. He follows her into that painting on the that I mentioned before in the alley. He roller skates into it, because that's what happens. If you roller skate into a painting on a wall, you will enter the painting, children. So that's...
And don't wear a helmet while doing so.
No, don't. Otherwise, it won't work. If you wear a helmet when you roller skate into the wall, you'll just it will stop. It will stop it. So roll into the wall. And so he goes into this neon heaven of sorts, where he tries to convince Kira that she should come back with him. And by convince, I mean he just sort of like insists in a very sort of selfish and childlike way, where he doesn't actually make a point ever. He's just like, no, you have to come with me because we love each other. Yeah, let me tell you, like, roller skating into a girl's parents' house and insisting that she has to come with you because you love each other does not usually go over very well. Like, it just, and her parents show up, who are not explicitly identified as, they don't really identify as Zeus and Hera anymore, although I think he's like, are you Zeus? And and the voice just says, I don't know, names, whatever. What's a name?
We don't use those old names anymore.
And they don't understand time, which in fairness, I feel like if you're that old, especially after these 2 years, that makes a lot of sense. Like, oh yeah, they're like a million years old. What exactly was the past and what is the future? What are these things? I don't know. They're kind of not really convinced. But then Kira sings a song and they say, let her go. And it ends with the opening night of Xanadu, and Danny, who I didn't mention, is Gene Kelly, who's just dancing up a storm and doing his whole Gene Kelly thing the whole movie. Gene Kelly on roller skates, and all these, and the big opening night for Xanadu. And Kira's there for that, but then she disappears, and Sonny's a little sad until there's a waitress that looks just like Kira, and he starts talking to her, and that's the end of the movie. Or that is a very squished down version of the movie. So, Xanadu.
Wow. Thank you, Sean. That was beautiful.
Oh, there's no way I'm topping that. And granted, I might be a little more sparse with my plot just because I feel like there's more to spoil in Saint Maud, so it might be a little less detailed than Xanadu, because Xanadu doesn't and can't really be spoiled, if we're being honest, because there's not much of an actual plot to be spoiled.
No, there wasn't much of an actual script at all, in fact, which we'll talk about.
yeah.
But I do want to note, you having a sparse synopsis is great. And also, don't worry about spoiling things. I'll say my little thing now about listeners. We're going to talk about these two films. We're going to probably spoil a lot of things from the film. So
cool.
If you don't want spoilers for 1980s Xanadu and 2019, I believe's Saint Maud, you can pause it now and go watch the films. But I think you would still enjoy the films even if you heard our conversation about them first.
Agreed. And actually, I think with Saint Maud, especially, you might be able to like just take it in a little bit more, because it's actually, this would be an interesting film to pair with something. But I recently rewatched Vox Lux, which is also kind of about the spiritual ties to artistic endeavors. And I do think when you know what's going to happen in a film, especially a very dense film like that or like Saint Maud, there's a little bit more, okay, I can notice the details. I can kind of follow along with what's going on and not have to be so like putting everything together. So I'll just spoil some stuff.
Definitely.
Just a little bit.
Definitely.
So, Saint Maud is the feature directorial debut of filmmaker Rose Glass, and we'll get more into what the first scene is actually about, but basically the film opens with our character Maud, played by Morfydd?
I think it's Morfydd.
Morfydd Clark. And she is in scrubs, and she is covered in blood, and she just looks like some shit just went down that she's not able to process. And she sees a bug crawling on the floor that seems to have some sort of like connection or tie to her. And then after that scene, we cut to probably like a few years later or some time later, where she's still working as an at-home nurse, and she gets assigned to the retired dancer Amanda, played by Jennifer L., who is in the last stages of some pretty gnarly cancer. And as she cares for her and they start to get to know each other a little bit more, they start to maybe relate a little bit about their pursuits of their different, I guess you would say, callings. For Maud, it's more of her religious inclinations. For Amanda, it's how important art and her dancing was to her. And at one point, they do seem to share some sort of, it kind of seems to be likening it to like an orgasmic sort of religious embodying experience, which Maud tends to have quite a few of throughout the film. And then that, either right before or right after that, is when a quote-unquote friend of Amanda comes to visit a lot, and Maud's just like not a fan of hers, and we honestly can't really tell if it's because it's two women being together or because she believes that Amanda's soul needs to be saved. This woman of the night probably is kind of like distracting Amanda from getting that soul saving. So their relationship definitely becomes like more and more intense as Maud kind of zeroes in on saving Amanda. And I think Amanda starts to get just like how much Maud wants to involve herself in her own life. And we also finally get, about halfway through the film, a sense of what happened in the beginning, which was that while she was performing CPR on an older patient, because the older patient's bones were just too brittle, her entire rib cage collapsed into herself. Which honestly, what's scarier is apparently that's like a fairly common thing when you are giving CPR on older people, is because they've had a certain level of osteoporosis and their muscle density can't really like protect the body as much. Like there's been times where people are giving CPR to older patients and the entire body just caves in on itself. But anyway, you find out about that happening to her when she was in residency and how much it traumatized her, and how finding religion kind of gave Maud, who we find out from an old friend from that residency is actually named Katie, how much that finding religion kind of gave her purpose and gave her meaning and kind of made her feel less alone in the world. Because it's very clear from the very beginning, she's very isolated, she's very alone. She doesn't really know how to connect with people, or maybe doesn't want to connect with people based off of that incident. So as the movie goes on, she starts getting more and more intense either visions and signs from God or hallucinations. There's like whirlwinds in the beer and more kind of like full body experiences. And it all comes to a head when, after a party where Amanda exclaims that God isn't real and Maud almost beats the shit out of her, she gets fired. But then after this like day-long, alcohol-filled, sex-filled bender, she gets a sign from God and actually like a message from God, which is spoken in either the actors. I don't know if it was implied that Maud is Welsh or if it was just because the actor playing the character is Welsh, but God speaks to her in her native tongue of Welsh and says, this is what you have to do. Like, this is what you have to become. So she goes to the house and exorcises and slays Amanda, and then proceeds to, the next morning, burn herself alive on the beach. The end.
Good times.
And that was also beautiful, Alanah.
Wait, she got some nice wings, too.
There's some nice golden wings.
She did kind of have like the Olivia Newton-John style during one shot of the self-immolation. She did have a little bit of like a Xanadu style yellow glow around her before that cut.
I was thinking the same thing, and I was thinking about how I'm going to do a show image for this episode where on one side it's a still from that of Maud, like as she's self-immolating, and then on the other side that classic shot that's on a lot of the Xanadu posters of Olivia Newton-John with like the glow. And then I was like, these are really similar shots. So yeah, agree. Lots in common between these two films. Should I share our decided connection?
Yeah.
I guess you can do that.
So these two films, besides all the obvious similarities between them, both feature a protagonist who appears to lose touch with reality as they sink further and further into a kind of religious fundamentalism. In Maud's case, Christianity. In Sonny Malone's case, I mean, according to him, according to Xanadu, the Greek gods really exist. And he talks to them and interacts with muses and all sorts of other things that can't happen according to natural law. And we were interested in kind of looking at these two films that in many respects are very, very different, but have this similar path for the protagonist in them. So how do we all feel about these two films? When did we watch them for the first time? What's our relationship with them? What are our feelings? Alanah, do you want to share your journey with Xanadu and St. Maud?
Okay, I am going to preface this with, just because like I don't like something, it doesn't mean it doesn't have artistic merit. Like, if I think something doesn't have artistic merit, it'll be very obvious because I'm a terrible liar and I can only lie so much. But I saw St. Maud for the first time like 7 or 8 months ago, and I didn't really, I guess I would say like the movie didn't land with me all that much. I think there were just certain choices about the perspective that we were supposed to see that movie through that I didn't absolutely love. The acting is great. Morfydd Clark is amazing. Jennifer L is fantastic, who, funny enough, is also in Vox Lux. But yeah, there was something about the film where I was like, because it's so locked into one perspective, I feel like it's not up for interpretation as much as some other films, maybe. Like Midsommar, I feel like would be a good example of, there is a little bit of that wiggle room for making your own decisions about whether things happened one way or whether things happened in another way. So I thought it was a very well done movie that just was not for me. And I loved Xanadu. I should say I was like on an international flight and had rented the movie for the show. And oddly enough, I actually saw the musical version of Xanadu before seeing the movie, which is very different because it's very like irreverent and it changes some details of the plot. Like the muses are a lot more involved in the musical. So having seen the musical and then watching the movie was a very interesting experience. But I like when movies know exactly what they are and they're not trying to pull the wool over your eye with like this big message or this big important thing. It's like, you're going to watch Gene Kelly dance. You're going to hear Olivia Newton-John sing. Going to be some dance numbers, some neon, and you're going to have a good time. And that's exactly what I had. I had a good time watching Xanadu.
Nice. Sean, did you have a good time watching Xanadu?
I always have a great time watching Xanadu. I first saw Xanadu maybe 10-ish years ago at the same place. I've seen a few movies that we're covering this year at my friend David's place. We were watching, he said, let's watch Xanadu. And so we put it up on his wall, and I got real drunk and real enjoyed it a lot. Like that time, it was just so strange and fun. And I saw it at least one time right after that. And then in the last year I saw it in, we got our Friday night text group that does movies, and we watched it in was it last year we watched it, I think?
It could have been last year. It could have been the year before.
Yeah.
I can check.
I
can check my Letterboxd, but I'm not sure.
And then I watched it again right before this. Honestly, I never really, like, the first time I watched it, I didn't really absorb much of what it was about. I just sort of, like, enjoyed it for whatever was going on. You know, the combo of Gene Kelly, and then you get Olivia Newton-John, and it's also Electric Light Orchestra. So, and the effects are cheesy and whatever. It also, you know, it incorporates a Don Bluth animation, which I'm a big fan of Don Bluth animation. And the works that they did, which don't get nearly enough credit for what they were doing, because they get buried by the Disney Renaissance of the 90s. So I just enjoy that one. I kind of also land on it's not really doing anything. It's just fun. I have criticisms of it as well. Like, I feel like there's a reason that the movie doesn't work as well for a lot of people. And I think it's because, honestly, the director and the cinematographer just didn't seem to know how to make a musical. There's a way in which you use, in a good musical, the camera is a part of the choreography, and the camera is very rarely part of the choreography in this movie. And sometimes the framing is weird, and it's like, guys, you're almost there. You're almost there. But yeah, I just really enjoy it. I think that's a lot of fun. And then Saint Maud was one of those movies that I kept seeing the trailers for before the pandemic, because it was supposed to come out in spring of 2020, and then it got delayed, and I was annoyed because it was one of those movies in 2020 I was super looking forward to, because it just looked really interesting to me. And then I guess I saw it right as soon as it became available to rent. I watched it, which I think was 2021. I think middle of 2021 it became available, and I really enjoy it. I think it's a interesting film that it's got a nice level of creepiness going with it, the good performances, and also, honestly, it's fairly efficient. It's not too long. It doesn't try to do too much. They're just like, here's the thing, and now it's done. Because I think it's only like 85 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, it's under 90.
Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, more of this. Just like, let's get in there, let's get it done, and let's not like, but also like good in that way. Like, not just short for no reason, like some Blumhouse stuff is just short and then it's missing something. This, I didn't feel like was missing anything, but really enjoyed it. But how did you feel, Nicole?
This was my second time watching both of these films. I saw Xanadu for the first time at the aforementioned Friday night watch a movie and text thing. Sean mentioned it was a year or two ago. I don't really know which it was. And I was watching it and texting at the same time, so I think it was even more confusing than it might otherwise have been because, you know, Xanadu, it's a paradox. There's a lot happening and there's not very much happening at the exact same time. But it can be disorienting because, you know, that's just how it is when there's that much creativity on screen, just vibrating and bursting like a neon aura around a muse roller skating so fast that she disappears, if you will. And I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it again rewatching it last night. I do think it is a bad movie in that I think it doesn't work in a lot of the ways it would like to. Some of the stuff Sean mentioned, definitely. There are some weaknesses in the script. There are some conceptual holes, perhaps you could say. My understanding is the original script for this film was 45 pages long. That's part of how you get that Don Bluth animated sequence and things like that. Love the Don Bluth animated sequence, by the way.
It's great.
You know, I think it's kind of a beautiful mess, I guess, is my feeling towards Xanadu. It's not even that I want it to be better. Like, it is what it is. I appreciate it for what it is. I enjoy it a lot for what it is. And I wouldn't quite say it's so bad it's good exactly. There's a little bit of that, but there's also a lot of stuff in it that's just good, like Gene Kelly dancing, for example. Or watching some Don Bluth animation. Like, that's not like that's just good. It's in this structure that's very flawed. But it's a weird and unique movie, and I like it a lot. Saint Maud, similar to Sean, I watched when it first became available streaming in I think it was spring 2020. I feel like I watched it on Hulu.
Yeah, it's on Hulu.
Mm-hmm. And like Sean, I'd been seeing the trailers for a long time and was like, oh, I will watch this film because realistically, like, usually I watch A24 horror films when the Alamo Drafthouse is advertising them to me incessantly. Like, at the time I had the like unlimited Alamo pass and could go see movies for free. Mm-hmm. So if something like that was coming out, I was going to see it. And I was looking forward to it a lot. And then the pandemic came and that didn't happen. And I was happy to watch it when it finally was available streaming. And I liked it a lot initially, like a lot. And on rewatch, I still liked it a lot. Kind of to Alanah's point earlier, I do think it was really nice to watch it a second time because the first time you're so much just kind of taking it in and putting together what's happening. And there are formal questions kind of introduced in Saint Maud where is something really happening or is it just happening from Maud's perspective is kind of more of an open question to a point upon first viewing. You're putting together what is this trauma that Maud is reacting to, what happened that made her lose her old nursing job. There's a lot that's never explicitly explained, like it's revealed, but there's no exposition dump where somebody's like, and you gave CPR to this old lady and now she's dead and that's why there was blood on your hands, and you know, literally and in your mind, you know, figuratively as well, and blah, you know, it's written well. It's a well-written film, I think, and I liked your point, Alanah, about the difference between this and Midsommar in terms of Saint Maud leaving less room for interpretation as like a weakness. I don't exactly agree, or in that wasn't my experience, but that makes a lot of sense to me. I think for me, part of what I liked was being so locked into this, because this is kind of my jam. This is just one of those things I like, is you've got a completely unreliable narrator and you're getting the whole story through their perspective. And especially in something like Saint Maud, part of what I liked about it is I really empathized with the protagonist. However much I didn't like her, would not want to be friends with her, did not relate to her, the film really put me in her perspective and helped me to, you know, relate more to somebody that I would normally find very, very, very difficult to relate to. I felt for her and I was moved by her struggle much as I was horrified by what she did. I also really like movies with well-rounded, in many respects, unsympathetic female characters.
Agreed. Yeah.
And I liked that both Maud and Amanda, the woman she's working for, felt very much like very real, very flawed women with an interesting dynamic between them and relationship that I hadn't really seen in film before. I hadn't quite seen that Maud-Amanda relationship. And frankly, I would have watched like a limited series about like Maud caring for Amanda and the ways they clash, the ways they come together. I thought Amanda was also a really well-drawn character.
Yeah.
In how she's like, she does mean things sometimes, but it's also super understandable to me. I'm like, you're dying of cancer. And as she says, like, you know, you don't know how boring it can be to die. So having a little fun with my like weirdo eccentric nurse, who she also feels affection for. You know, it felt like it's not that she's like sadistically tormenting Maud. It's that she's stuck having to be cared for by this kind of religious fundamentalist who's trying to save her soul. And she's kind of like, well, fuck, I might as well have some fun with this, which I kind of get. And that's a different dynamic than what I've seen. And I also thought it was just, I thought the score was great. I thought the cinematography was really good. There are a lot of these really well composed wide shots that I really, really like. Performances, like you both said, performances are great. And I like that it's really tight. It gets in and gets out. It's very precise. I think it's a really well done film. And also, after seeing it the first time, it's a little bit less disturbing in some ways to rewatch because you know where it's, for me at least, because I know where it's going. So I could actually see myself watching this film a lot of times, even though it's kind of an upsetting film, because I like the craftsmanship of it so very much. So yeah, that's what we thought about these films. Other people saw these films too, I believe. I don't think it's just the three of us.
Nicole, did you know that Jeanette Maslin thinks Xanadu is a mess?
I'm shocked.
Would you like
what
to
a
hear
transition.
what Janet Maslin said?
For Jeanette Maslin of the New York Times?
Janet Maslin of the New York Times. Would you like to know what Janet Maslin of the New York Times said?
I would love to. I would love to.
Bet you would. Because you copied this. Janet Maslin said that Miss Newton-John plays the magical woman with whom both a young artist, Michael Beck, and a less young former musician, Gene Kelly, have been smitten. It seems she is a muse who 40 years ago brightened Mr. Kelly's life and is now doing the same for Mr. Beck. The film treats this fanciful notion gently without overworking it, but the muse theme does have one depressing aspect. The filmmakers evidently not confident that the audience will know who muses are or what they do, has Miss Newton-John tell Mr. Beck to look up the word in the dictionary.
Can I say something about that? Okay, I have disagreed on this very podcast with Janet Maslin's assessments of films we discussed many times. I don't disagree with her that Xanadu is a mess. I absolutely think Xanadu is a mess. However, that moment with the dictionary, that to me is one of those moments, and I don't know how you two feel about this, but there were many points where Kira really reminded me of Freddy Krueger, and this was one of them.
Ooh.
One read I think you can make of there were many points where Xanadu started feeling like it was a horror movie to me, and like Kira was the Freddy Krueger kind of trickster character who maybe Sonny Malone was going to end up dead, but you know, and arguably he did. We can like that is another potential read of the film, that he either dies or is in a near death state, or perhaps a coma after he crashes into the wall, and nothing after that actually happens. It all happens in his brain, a la Jacob's Ladder. That theory was put forth, I believe, initially for me on when How Did This Get Made covered Xanadu. And I kind of see it that way, honestly, to some degree. But I saw the dictionary part as less being about teaching people what muses are, because they really don't do a good job of that in this film, of explaining anything. Maybe that was the initial impetus, but to me, I just thought it was like some Freddy Krueger, like, look, I can change the words in the dictionary. Because it's like he reads the definition and then it says, like, now do you believe me, Sonny? This is Kira who magically inserted these words into the dictionary because I'm a magic muse doing magics.
And then and then she gets the TV to talk to him, and like,
that was very
very
Twilight
Freddy
Zone,
Krueger.
that moment, actually. Like, there's that episode of the Twilight Zone where the guy, all of the appliances in his house are telling him to kill himself. And then because he goes so mad from trying to get away from these appliances that are talking to him, his car eventually, like, drives him into a tree or something, so it looks like a suicide.
oh god.
Yeah, that actually reminds me a lot of Xanadu.
There you go.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And that doesn't remind me, I mean, that does remind me a little bit of Saint Maud. A little bit. The whole, because of this divine intervention, I'm driven to suicide, basically.
Yeah.
For a higher purpose.
Arguably, I think both of these films are about protagonists ultimately killing themselves as part of their divine mission, whether that's to save a soul, or at least try to save a soul, or open a club. I mean, that's what the muse is. Like, Kira literally says, I was sent here to make sure Xanadu opens in this really weird, convoluted way. I can't just go back to my old boyfriend, Gene Kelly, and be like, oh, you need a club? Here, go to this club. Instead, I've got to, like, ensnare this new young guy in my weird Freddy Krueger muse games, show him the club, and get him to tell Gene Kelly about it. Why?
I mean, if you think about how Maud ends up looking at the end of Saint Maud, there's another Freddy Krueger parallel.
There you go.
Yeah, Maud has some parallels.
So these are just Nightmare on Elm Street entries. Wait, what year did that?
Yeah.
What year did Nightmare on Elm Street come out? 82?
84.
84. Oh, so this is actually Nightmare on Elm Street is instead a spinoff of Xanadu.
Or a ripoff of Xanadu.
There you go. I think we're gonna have to dig up Wes Craven and be like, why did you rip off Xanadu?
And he would say, why the hell not? Let me rest in
That's
peace.
true.
Haven't I done enough for you?
Apparently not.
I think that Janet Maslin reviews, like, fairly emblematic. I think critics generally
They didn't like Xanadu.
no, and I mean, however much we may all like Xanadu, I think, well, you two can push back. I'm not gonna say that critics should have been like, this is a great film. I think they're right that it's in many respects a bad film, but maybe other people here just disagree. Ebert gave it 2 stars.
Okay.
And said Xanadu is a mushy and limp musical fantasy so insubstantial it keeps evaporating before our eyes. It's one of those rare movies in which every scene seems to be the final scene. It's all ends and no beginnings, right up to the actual end, which is a cheat. I don't really disagree. I have more positive feelings, but
yeah.
I don't really disagree with anything he said.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I would rather that than what we get way too often now, which is constant beginnings. And then there's like, and then there's a wrap up. Well, last weekend we watched the new Firestarter movie, which is mostly first act. Like, it's like half the movie is like first act stuff, like setting the table. And then to the point where I think my entire like little letterbox review of that was this feels like it's like a TV pilot. It's like, okay, here's the start. And I'm like, okay, so where's the rest of the story? Like, I'd rather movies where it was just like, here's a bunch of endings than here's a nonstop beginning. Yes, I think that, like, it's fair to say that Xanadu is not great, perhaps even bad. However, it is also amazing.
I also think when I was doing some research on the making of Xanadu and the release of Xanadu, I found a very interesting tidbit that I think 2 or 3 weeks before Xanadu was supposed to come out, the disco demolition night at the Comiskey Park in Chicago when like everyone just decided that disco was the worst thing to happen to humanity, and that radio DJ told everybody to come to Comiskey Park, bring their disco records, and we'd like literally explode them. We'd burn them up. There's another parallel. But I do think there was also this kind of public shaming of disco stuff, like disco music, disco fashion, disco vibes, which are all over Xanadu. I do think that the movie kind of had a wrong place, wrong time moment in that it was supposed to be released back when disco was still cool and everybody still liked it. But then suddenly, because there's something inherently wrong with disco, and the Bee Gees documentary actually brings up a good point that disco was very much made up of not just the artists, but the fans. It was a lot of folks of color and folks in the LGBTQ community. So there was a little bit of like xenophobia surrounding disco. And that's actually one thing I saw in the background dancers in Xanadu. It wasn't just a bunch of like white people. I feel like I saw a lot of like different kinds of people being background dancers. I could be wrong. I didn't like research every single background dancers, but I saw folks of color. I saw some folks that it seemed like they were maybe non-binary or transgender. So I do feel like there was kind of this like sudden rejection of disco that Xanadu got caught in the crossfires of, and maybe a bit of an unfair way. And the reviewers, because they didn't want to be that one reviewer that said, hey, I like Xanadu, it was fun, everyone just kind of felt like they had to jump on the bandwagon.
I think that's a really good point, that the disco backlash, which was very much about racism and homophobia and other kinds of queer phobia, being a part of the reception of Xanadu. And it's funny because Xanadu, you're right that it is disco vibes all over Xanadu. It's like very much a disco movie, but they never say that.
They never say disco, yeah.
They're like, no, it's the kinds of music that they reference in Xanadu and that the club Xanadu is supposedly bringing together are rock and roll, which there's very little of in Xanadu, and big band music, which there's also very little of in Xanadu, meaning Xanadu the film. In Xanadu the club, there's basically none of either of those. The music that they're playing is at the end is not rock and roll or big band music. There isn't much rock and roll going on at all. There are some people in like those suits that kind of look, they reminded me of the Janet Jackson video All Right, if anyone remembers that, which harkens back to the big band era and has like
the zoot suits,
Sid Charisse and like all these other and there are those dancers in those like oversized kind of zoot suit things, but that's about it for the big band, which is disappointing after that number. I thought it was one of the most successful as a musical numbers in the piece, where earlier in the film there's a part where Sonny Malone, the frustrated angsty artist who we need to talk about more, and Gene Kelly, who used to have a club and play with Glenn Miller and stuff, apparently, are both fantasizing about what they want their cool club to be. And Sonny Malone is picturing rock and roll, and Gene Kelly's picturing classy big band. And then you literally see, and they're cutting back and forth between these two different sets where they're playing two different songs. But then the two songs begin to merge and the two sets like literally roll towards each other until they overlap. And the big band club and the rock and roll club are now in the same place, and the two different songs have merged into one song. And I was like, oh, this went on way too long, but it is kind of cool. But
it did go on way too long.
It was long.
It was,
but I mean,
it was a lengthy sequence. Yeah.
They had to make up that runtime, you know. And I'm not really complaining. But I am just pointing out that they're two separate visions that then became this enmeshed vision, and fantasy has nothing to do with what the music actually is in Club Xanadu. It's just disco and roller skating.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if maybe that was like a studio note scene. Like that would be kind of really close cutting it, but I do wonder if with all the disco sucks hysteria, if we're being honest, I do wonder if the studio was like, oh, suddenly we have to kind of bring it away from disco as much as humanly possible, which would also kind of explain the ELO soundtrack, which like isn't super disco and more kind of 80s on top of a very 70s disco vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, I just said it's interesting how the disco backlash, the disco backlash in general is interesting, and how that plays into Xanadu, in particular, as well as the critical response, because there definitely was for a long time, certainly in music, and I would imagine this bled over into film criticism in a lot of ways as well. Like this, what used to be called, or maybe still is called, kind of rockist bigotry against disco, that whether consciously or not was being informed by and certainly furthering this like racism and queer phobia. And I also wanted to bring it back. I'm rambling a bit, but to your point, Alanah, of like, yeah, it's interesting when you watch Xanadu, because I'm like, this is hella queer. Like the backup dancers, there's like all these like, there are S&M vibes at points. There are points where I'm like, oh, this is a little edgy for what I think of as, you know, Xanadu being. But that's also, that's disco, right? Like that's a lot of the stuff that was becoming a little bit more mainstreamed, or there was being more crossover between different subcultures via the disco craze. And a lot of that was progressive in a lot of ways, which then got written out of the history through this like raucous disco sucks, like disco's the worst, real music is rock and roll, which also tends to be whiter, and certainly in the 80s at least pretending to be straighter, even though, you know, it's all in how you look at it perhaps. But Saint Maud, unlike Xanadu, got overall pretty good reviews, I believe, didn't it?
Yes. Yeah, we got our New York Times person in this time. It's Jeanette Catsoulis. It said folding sexual arousal and religious ecstasy into a single gasping sensation. Saint Maud, the feature debut of director Rose Glass, burrows into the mind of a lonely young woman and finds psycho horror gold. Oh, that sounds very positive to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that review.
Psycho Horror Gold kind of sounds like a weird like Halloween disco record. And I mean that in a really positive way. Like I would go and buy that for my Halloween celebrations.
That would be
I would like to hear that disco record. That actually, I would love to see the like sequel to Xanadu that's maybe a Xanadu Saint Maud crossover, and
yeah,
Psycho Horror Gold could be you know, their hit record that Saint Maud makes when she and Olivia Newton-John, Kira, pair up to help guide lost souls. Yeah, just to round up the critical response, Sheila O'Malley, Ebert had passed on at the time Saint Maud came out, but Ebert.com lives on, and other reviewers post reviews there, such as Sheila O'Malley, who gave Saint Maud 3.5 stars out of 4 and said, is Maud touched by the divine, or is she going mad? Is there a difference? That's kind of key to what we're talking about with the connections between the films here. And then to what Alanah raised earlier, Saint Maud stays very close to Maud's point of view. She is in every scene. We see events through her eyes. The glimpses we get of other people's sometimes alarmed responses to her are important moments of outside perspective, but Maud is our only entry into the story. This makes for some very tough but rewarding viewing, although the film has much in common with other religious-based horror films and is often quite terrifying in its own right. Saint Maud is mostly interested in the experiential realities of its central characters, and Clark is so deeply in touch with Maud's shattered psyche, it's impossible to look away from her. Yeah, I kind of speaks to some of what we were talking about before. In general, Rotten Tomatoes has Saint Maud 93% fresh with critics. A lot of the films we talk about on this show that we like, critics didn't so much. This is an exception. Unlike Xanadu, perhaps, Saint Maud is a movie that came out at the exact right time for critics to embrace this sort of, excuse me while I gag, quote unquote, elevated horror.
Horror's always been good. Y'all are just catching up.
Zoom meeting. I know.
I'm saying how the critics are perceiving it. That is not a phrase, as you know, that's in my vernacular to use unironically. Xanadu, however, was 29% fresh with critics, but 58% fresh with audiences. St. Maud was 64% fresh with audiences. So interestingly, Xanadu and St. Maud have very close scores in terms of audience reception, which kind of makes a lot of sense.
And Xanadu, like, in fairness, like, anybody going to Rotten Tomatoes to review Xanadu, most of them are going to like it. If they're going to take the time to go on to Rotten Tomatoes and do it from a movie from 1980. Like, which is good. You know, it's the audience for the film, people who want it.
But yeah, so, and in terms of money, box office, awards, other reception, St. Maud grossed $1.4 million. I couldn't find how much it cost. It was like a BFI film, you know, it was made in another land where they have funding for films and things.
National funding.
Yeah, that's different from how we fund things here. I don't know how much it cost, you know, and with a movie like that, I don't know how much the box office gross tells you, especially it came out, you know, in a pandemic when before people were back to theaters so much.
Yeah, it got such a limited theatrical run. Like, that's probably like, that probably puts it in the top like 50 for the year, though.
Yeah,
something like that, at least that. So
Xanadu, on the other hand, grossed $23 million, which surprised me because it's such a notorious bomb, but it only cost $20 million to make, and I'm like,
it's a little bit more. And that was before the era of, like, you had to make at least twice as much on the first weekend before everybody called it a bomb. I think it just was a critical bomb, and then it didn't, like, run away with everybody seeing it and making like $100 million or something like that. That, like, it's going to be called a bomb. So.
Pardon for the interruption. I do also think that from what I read, this movie, much more than St. Maud, was like heavily, heavily advertised. There was lots of crossover promotion. I read something about how in Macy's you could go get a Muse makeover and they sold clothes inspired by Xanadu with like Xanadu t-shirts and whatnot. So probably it also bombed in that they're not telling us how much they spent on P&A, publicity and advertising. So I wouldn't be surprised if that budget was more like 30 million, if we're being honest.
Yeah,
that's a good point. That's a good point. Xanadu did rake in some awards though, like the Razzie for Worst Director for Robert Greenwald. It was also nominated for Worst Picture, Actor, Actress, Screenplay, and Worst Original Song. That's not fair. Those songs weren't like the worst of the year. That's
why it didn't win.
Yeah, it didn't win. I don't know what won Worst Original Song. I think Can't Stop the Music beat it for Worst Picture. Speaking of Disco Sucks. I mean, I've never seen Can't Stop the Music, so I can't speak to it, but speaking to the disco backlash. And I believe Brooke Shields won for the Return to the Blue Lagoon, whatever it's called, Worst Actress, which seems pretty fucking mean to give it to like teenage Brooke Shields.
Yeah.
Wait, are the Razzies being mean? It's oh no.
Well, also I believe the Razzies were invented for Xanadu because this guy was just so upset about its existence that it created, or he created the Razzies just so he could give Xanadu all of these awards. I'm like, come on, dude.
The Razzies can kind of suck it, in my opinion. Actually, it also won least special, or it was nominated for least special effects, which I thought those effects were extremely special.
They were a lot of
uniquely
fun.
Special. And for the Stinkers Bad Movie Awards, it was also nominated for Best Major Motion Picture from the Family Entertainment. Oh no, Best Family Entertainment.
Best Major Motion Picture in Family Entertainment for the Young Artist Awards.
Young Artist Awards, you know, the Young Artist Awards, those enduring awards. And it was also nominated for Best Family Music Album. Okay. However, also Olivia Newton-John was nominated for Best International Actress at the Jupiter Awards, which are still around, I believe. Those are sci-fi awards. And Xanadu was nominated for a ton of like BAFTAs, and I don't think we need to go through all of them. Morfydd Clark won a few awards for her lead performance. Rose Glass had won some awards. The film as a whole won some awards. Like it was a well-received indie film that got nominated for a bunch of stuff. Yes, Alanah, looks like you want to say something. I think you
said Xanadu instead of Saint Maud, which was like the greatest thing ever to hear that Xanadu got nominated for a bunch of BAFTAs.
From my mouth to Zeus's ear.
I was like, in a perfect world. In a perfect world.
Make it happen, man.
Oh my God. Will it into existence.
Let us will it into existence. But before we do that, Sean, do we have bills to pay? Xanadu, Saint Maud, what do they reflect about one another?
Well, they both heavily lean into divine intervention. And I think, Xanadu is playing off of the traditions in Greek mythology where divine intervention, like the gods were just around all the time doing stuff. And if you weren't careful, if you did the wrong stuff, you might piss off one of them who was just in disguise. So it's playing off of a tradition where they were just around and would get involved with people's lives in the fantastic and the mundane. And like, it's sort of just kind of playing off like, well, a muse would inspire somebody to do things. So it's going to inspire this dude to help another dude have a disco. And then Saint Maud is coming off of that Christian mythology tradition where divine intervention is rare and really reserved for like major events, like an angel showing up and saying, hey, you're having God's kid. Or hey, I'm going to flood everything, so you should build a boat. If you don't build a boat, you're going to die like everybody else. That's generally like with divine intervention and a lot of Christianity. It's mostly like something either really important or really terrible is going to happen. So God or one of God's assistants shows up to let people know what's up. So very different traditions that they're coming from, which I think is reflected in the film Xanadu. It's generally positive, and in Saint Maud, it's a little bit scarier. Although, as you established, Xanadu does kind of border on horror movie a little bit every once in a while. So
when she shows up at his house,
oh yeah,
she's just like there, and she's like lurking behind him, and he doesn't see her, and we do. Like, and also then he's just like, oh, you're in my house. Like, no, that's creepy.
Yeah, but that was like 1980. That was fine.
It's not okay, even in 1980, for a strange lady to show up in your house when you didn't tell her where you lived. You certainly didn't give her a key, and she's just there.
But Nicole, she has roller skates.
And she's blonde.
Yeah.
And she has a cool Australian accent, so
you're right. That's different rules for
different
blonde
rules.
Australians on roller skates.
It's true.
Oh my God.
So yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say they have kind of different attitudes, the films, towards divine intervention, at least if you're staying within the perspective of the protagonist.
Yes.
Which is a little bit of a hair we could split. But within the perspective of the protagonist, well, no, because within Maud's perspective, the divine intervention is great. But from what we see in the film, it is made very clear to the audience that it is harming her, that what she is perceiving as being divine intervention, at least, ultimately leads to her death, as well as the death of another person sooner than it would have come. She could have at least died of cancer rather than getting stabbed to death by her ex-nurse. Like Xanadu, the plot maybe not the protagonist, the plot of Xanadu sees divine intervention as mostly positive. It's what allows the Club Xanadu to open, which, I mean, is what could be better than that? Whereas in Saint Maud, it leads to, to Maud getting further and further isolated and kind of spiraling in on herself, and then ultimately killing her former employer as well as herself. So, yeah, I mean, but also you could see it, because the only way to me that Xanadu really makes sense is if it's either a Jacob's Ladder situation where he is not actually conscious starting from the point he hits that wall, and the rest of the third act of the film where Club Xanadu actually opens and Olivia Newton, he reconnects with Olivia Newton-John, and then she's there, and then she disappears, and then she's back as the other, waitress, totally unexplained, and all that is just a hallucination he's having in his own head. And previously he was losing it a little bit, and Kira was potentially just a woman stalking him and fucking with him, basically. Or another, and then this leads him to try to reconnect with her once she's finally done with him, and then he's in a coma or whatever, and we see Act 3 of the film. So from that reading, his perception of divine intervention is not necessarily positive. Or another reading I have is that Olivia Newton-John and Gene Kelly are an actual couple, and their kink is trying to get someone involved into like a three-way, either just having a three-way or maybe a throuple type relationship via massive manipulation. That's their kink. That's the other way that Xanadu makes any sense to me. And Sonny Malone is interpreting this as divine intervention because he doesn't want to, as somebody says in Saint Maud, as Amanda says in Saint Maud, people don't see what they don't want to. She says that when Maud says that claims to not notice the hair plugs in Amanda's like former lover who's over drinking with her, and Saint Maud is like, or not Saint Maud, Maud is disapproving, and Amanda's trying to kind of gossip with her, and is like, oh, did you see his hair plugs? And she's like, no, I didn't notice them because I'm too, wrapped up with God to notice something like that. And Amanda's like, yeah, people don't see what they don't want to see. And Sonny didn't want to see that his special clarinet friend Gene Kelly and his special wacky manic pixie dream demon Kira are, not actually a muse, and, this guy who had a relationship with a muse who then disappeared, that it's not actually like weird fantasy stuff that can't really happen, that it's just a weird couple trying to seduce him through their weird game.
I do also think there's the similarity of the power imbalance between the divine entity and the mortal entity, because I was listening on the subway the other day to Magic, which is like the big song that hit #1 on the charts from Xanadu, and the lyrics are, come take my hand, you should know me, I've always been in your mind, you know I will be kind, I'll be guiding you, building your dream has to start now, there's no other road to take, you won't make a mistake, I'll be guiding you, which reminded me so much of the like conversation with God that Maud has in her apartment, that it does seem like there is this idea of, even though like art is kind of the religion in Xanadu more than like religion is the religion, or Christianity is the religion, there is this power imbalance of like, you are the vehicle for this bigger thing to happen, and your role is your role whether you like it or not. And I just found the lyrics when I was listening to the song again like very striking in terms of how much it reminded me of Saint Maud.
That absolutely parallels Saint Maud and Saint Maud's search for a path, or wanting to hear God articulate her path and mission to her, and resonates a lot with. It's part of how Xanadu is messy, is like the way the Greek gods element and the kind of like art, follow your artistic muse element come together. Don't I guess you could say. If I can just finish my thought, one of the things, but it's interesting because part of one of the things that's insufferable to me about Xanadu, although it becomes kind of masochistically pleasurable for me, is just how much of a wet blanket Sonny Malone is. Like, I think he sucks. He's a whiny little bitch, basically. He apparently that role was offered to John Travolta. John Travolta was like, that's okay. Ended up being played by what's his name, Beck, who's just like a charisma void. Like, he brings nothing. Like, it's just he brings nothing to it, in my opinion. And he opens the movie just being like, I'm trying to draw. I'm going to throw it out the window, which somehow brings the muses, even though he didn't, like, paint that mural.
He did in an earlier draft, actually.
Oh, that was established in an earlier draft?
And then I remember in the musical, obviously it's like the actor standing still, but he has them painting the mural and being like, meh, it's not worth it. And then I'm Alive is like the opening number where all the muses come to life. Yeah, I was reading IMDb trivia. And that
would have made more sense than what happened. But so at the beginning, Sonny Malone is kind of set up as like the true artist, right? He doesn't want to do that commercial shit. And as Sean pointed out, for reasons that were very confusing to me, he apparently, despite the fact that he has a job that pays very well, he can take very long lunches during, and doesn't have many demands of him, he can't just paint outside of work hours.
Or at least do something.
He's an artist.
Right.
And he should apparently get paid to just like do his art, which obviously I think is what we would all love, but not not an option.
But you also
for
have
any of us.
Yeah, and you also have to actually like work at that. Like, not just sit in your apartment and like do your art and then wait for somebody to pay you.
Because that's the other thing. Because he also is like, well, I went freelance and I was trying to like make a go at doing my art, but then I didn't know what to paint. And I'm like, I can relate to these issues. What I can't relate to is complaining to anybody else about it in this way. But it kind of seems like it's about the conflict between art and commerce, like in, I don't know, Josie and the Pussycats or Speed Racer or some of the other films we've talked about on this podcast that are about like the conflict between like capitalism and art, basically, and trying to be an artist when there's the need to pay bills and profit and pressure to have, be doing it in a way that other people are going to be profiting off of and things like that. Xanadu's not interested in any of that.
Nope. That's a big nope.
In fact, weirdly then, when Kira shows up, it's not to help Sonny make his art. He stops making his art.
Well,
it's to help him open a club, which he also brings nothing to. Like, and he's whiny when Gene Kelly's like, I'm going to give you 50% equity in this club that you did nothing about except say, hey, here's the space. Mm-hmm. That's all he brought, was he found the space that actually Kira found. But he's like 50% owner. We don't see scenes of him like painting the club. It's not that like he's inspired and the walls of the club are like all these like muse murals or something like that. Like, that could have made sense. Or like even if he decorated the club, something. They're always like, you've got a good eye. Like, multiple people tell him he has a good eye, but absolutely nothing he does for the rest of the movie has anything to do with his eye. So that's one of the flaws of Xanadu, I would say, is in terms of the kind of divine... It gets a little muddied. The path gets muddied. Well, Saint Maud, the divine path, is very clear. Xanadu, there's some mud and grass and, slime and stuff. Obscuring.
I think that the part of the difference is that for Xanadu, she's not intervening for Sonny. She's intervening for Danny. Sonny is a vehicle for the divine intervention. Sonny is there to, on behalf of the muse, indirectly be like, hey, you should start a club again. And Danny go like, I should start a club again. And then here's a place you can do it. Here is a place I can do it. Like, Danny's really, I think one of the things that's a confusion with it, and it's on the fault of the filmmakers, is that the film is like, you think the film's supposed to be about like Sonny being inspired by Kira and then they fall in love around that. But instead it's really like Kira is using him as a vessel to provide this inspiration, to lead Danny to this, and he falls in love with her through that.
It
would almost be better if he wasn't an artist.
Yeah.
Yeah, the art thing feels very like just got forgotten about almost.
If he was like a 20-something that just didn't know what to do with his life and was like, I just don't want to be a part of corporate America.
That would make sense. That would work a lot better. On the How Did This Get Made about this, June Diane Raphael put forth a theory that I also thought was interesting and kind of relates to what you just said, Sean, which is that Kira is not actually the muse for either of them. They are both muses for her, and her project is creating Club Xanadu.
Oh, okay.
And
or
I just thought that was interesting.
Or maybe they're just her tools for it. She's like, I'm a muse. I can't get alone. Like, I have no history. Also,
it's like Nightmare on Elm Street too.
Yeah, there you go.
She's Freddy, and they're the bodies, right? Like
go.
she needs a body to do stuff in the corporal world, since she apparently like disappears a lot when she does it.
Yeah,
she just appears for an album cover and then she's gone. Exactly.
So
she can't get alone. She can't. Sign a lease.
She's mostly a user because she also used that photographer to get Sonny's attention, like one of the many things. So yeah. In the end, now I'm starting to see her as a lot more like the god in Saint Maud, where it's just about like, you're gonna have to do this thing that I tell you. Arguably, she's worse. She's a lot more manipulative. Keeps making people fall in love with her. So maybe her whole plan from the 1940s was to make Xanadu happen. I mean, she's maybe just working on a really long timeline here. Like she meets Danny in the 40s and is like, you know what I want? I want a club, but it's not the time yet for a club. So I'm gonna make this guy fall in love with me so he remembers me. I'll come back later. Comes back later. Now is the time. 1980. Now is the time for Club Xanadu. There you go.
Yeah, and it's a lot more insidious, I think, from a certain perspective than Saint Maud, because the god in Saint Maud, setting aside, the interpretation I think is correct, which is that Maud is imagining, but like let's whatever within the realm of her imagination, what's happening. The god is a lot more like Pinhead or the Cenobites or something, in that she pursued that god. She's like, hey, I'm here. I'm putting pins inside my shoes and tormenting myself. Don't waste my pain. Give me my fucked up path. God, I am begging you for that. Sonny was just like, it's not fair. I want to get paid to do nothing. And then Kira just shows up and is like, I'm going to Freddy manipulate you into starting Xanadu. He didn't go looking. He wasn't searching. Maud was a searcher. And Sonny was like the opposite. I mean, Sonny is one of the most kind of void protagonists I've seen in a minute in a film. I was just like, why? Although you notice he was listed third in the credits, even though he's functionally the protagonist of the film. Well, that's a question. Who do we think the protagonist of Xanadu is?
I think it's Kira.
I think I like the reading that it's Kira.
Well, yeah.
She's also the one who...
because she's... Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go for it. Go for it.
Especially because of like that kind of fourth wall breaking wink that she has at the end of the shot. I do think it's very much like us realizing, or the film revealing its cards of like, Kira's been in the driver's seat the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
and I think she's the one who I'd have to go back and break it down more, but my standard for figuring out the protagonist is I always just kind of look at I lean on like who's making decisions that move the story forward, or who's the main person doing that, and I think she's the one who's doing that. Like, much like the Joker in The Dark Knight, she is not often she's probably not typically viewed as a protagonist, but she is. So
yeah, I think that's I think you could also argue that Gene Kelly's Danny is the protagonist, but I prefer I prefer the Kira as protagonist. I think that makes more sense. And I think the fact that you could argue any of these also speaks to some of the messiness of Xanadu.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the filmmakers were necessarily clear on who the protagonist is. It may have switched each time they did more cocaine. So just saying. I did want to bring in something I thought was interesting that I hadn't known, that I read in this People magazine 35-year retrospective on Xanadu, which was that in 1983, Louisiana resident Michael Owen began to think that Olivia Newton-John actually was a Greek goddess who used her eyes to communicate with him. The story, as summarized by Entertainment Weekly, we can link that EW article in the show notes, ended with Perry going on a killing spree. Speaking to EW, Newton-John said the incident marked a frightening moment in her high-profile career. I guess because I was playing this ethereal character, he got reality and show business confused. I left the country for a while. That was a very scary time. I bet it was a scary time, Olivia Newton-John. I'm sorry that happened to you. But it also, I was like, whoa, so Michael Owen Perry was kind of having a Saint Maud type, thing.
Yeah.
With Olivia Newton-John, like looking to her and seeing, so like a lot of what, before I knew that, I had no idea that terrible event had occurred. And that's a bit of a big downer to bring into our whimsical discussion of ways in which Kira is like Freddy Krueger and Xanadu is like Saint Maud in terms of characters, of, divine intervention and communicating with gods and things like that. And here is a tragic example of someone in real life.
But it is like, I think, very related to like how you can look at both these films and what we were talking about in like perception. Like in both these films, I think it's a little less arguable, other than just kind of having fun with trying to figure out Xanadu, whether or not the perspective of Xanadu is that she's a real like muse and all these things happen. I think Saint Maud tries to play it a little bit more ambiguous. But like, people's perception of these things, like or perceptions of reality, like, is this a thing that's actually happening, or is this something that's all in their heads? I mean, it's a real concern, in everyday life, are people perceiving action, like, I don't want to say actual reality, but like the shared reality amongst everyone else, or are they having an entirely different experience of things? So this Michael Owen Perry was, I think it's an open question whether or not what happens in Saint Maud is all just sort of in her head, or there is a god that she's interacting with. I think there's arguments on both sides of that. I tend towards the that it is in her head, mostly because of the final shot. Like, it goes from like that shot of her on the beach and she's glowing and stuff, and then it just has that quick cut to the screaming and cover and the screaming and burning, which I think is just like that for the filmmakers, just so like the final word for the film is going to be this shot of, she's not glowing and stuff, she's actually burning alive. And I realized in the second watch of the movie, Saint Maud this time, how much they tease with the lighter and fire throughout the film.
Birthday candles.
Yeah, or when she's alone, the first time she goes out on her own, she's playing with the lighter and it won't light. She's just sort of flicking it. And then in Xanadu, well, I think the perspective of the film is probably like, this all just happened. I do think that there's a couple questions there, does Sonny just die? at when he runs into that wall, and the rest is just like, as you said, a Jacob's ladder situation. But even if we don't look at that part of it, we could also have a question about whether or not, so for Xanadu, like the difference there, we could like ask about like, well, is Sonny dead or alive? But like, that's one question. You could also ask at the very end there's the girl who looks like Kira, and whether or not that is Kira. Did Kira become immortal and so that she could be with Sonny, at which point one has to ask, is she in her right mind? Like, is that like, does she choose to stay with him? Are they the same person, or is it just a girl who looks like him? I mean, I think there's perceptual stuff that could be addressed with both of these movies, but also then that's reaction to the movie. So what do y'all think? Is Maud talking to God? Is that fun to rhyme? What do you think?
I think, and this is actually one of the things I should say that I didn't love about this film is that because of that final word shot of her burning alive, I feel like it was a very hard no. Whereas something like, this is a very different movie, but It's a Wonderful Life, there is a little bit more of that, like, maybe this was just a dream, maybe it was an angel, and there's like a little bit more interpretation to it. I definitely think it's all in her head. And it's interesting because I was thinking about when I heard that story about Michael Owen Perry, it made me think about like violence and film, and also the idea that like something that is, I should say, supposed to be pure and good, like a fun disco movie with Olivia Newton-John or God's Love in St. Maud's case, they cause horrifically violent acts to take place, which I think is an odd parallel between these movies.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I agree with Alanah that I think it's all in Maud's head. I think Sean's point about the final shot where we see her dousing herself with acetone on the beach, and we see her like glowing gold and growing these angel wings, and we see all the people on the beach stop and drop to their knees and raise their hands up in some sort of religious exaltation of some sort. And was that a word? Exaltation?
Yeah.
Exaltation.
That's it. Okay. Wow.
That's
okay.
and it's even the correct use of it.
Wow. Great.
Hey.
Amazing. Good for me. 0.1 for Nicole. So it's all that. And then the last shot of the film, like Sean said, is they cut to, she lights herself on fire, but she's like beaming and like radiant, and everybody's like, having this God moment. And then it cuts to what I think we all see as being, objective reality to whatever degree such a thing exists. And it's her in flames, screaming in agony with her face burning off. And it's a really quick shot, but I agree with Alanah that I think that is the filmmakers tipping their hand and being like, no, God wasn't talking to her. Mm-hmm. This isn't a movie about someone God was actually talking to. Unlike Alanah, I liked that in this context. I also like It's a Wonderful Life and stories where it's ambiguous. We talked about It's a Wonderful Life, actually, on this podcast. We talked about it together with The Exorcist.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one coming out around Christmas time.
With Liam Billingham for our Christmas episode. But Liam Billingham of the Oeuvre Busters podcast, which many of us have been on at various points. But in any event, I liked that because I appreciated that they were like, they weren't, how can I put this? I appreciated that they weren't like trying to have it both ways.
Right. They weren't trying to make her a hero.
They weren't trying to make her a hero. They weren't trying to cop out on what their point of view was towards this material. So for me in this case, I liked that. And yeah, I don't think God was talking to her. I think she was very traumatized. and not coping with that and increasingly isolated. And one of the things I liked so much on this watch was like all of the moments where it appears that something supernatural may be happening, of which there are a number. She sees a whirlpool in her beer. Before she kills Amanda, she sees Amanda's face contort and her voice distort in a somewhat demonic way. When we see Amanda try to push Maud away, Maud kind of flies across the room as if Amanda has some sort of demonic strength that this frail, dying woman probably would not have. And and there's also the moment where after I keep calling her Saint Maud, after Maud/Katie has gone on her drunken bender and is kind of at her lowest point around the end of Act 2, before God speaks to her, she like throws up and then imagines herself levitating. And there's also a thing that's established in the film where she's having chronic stomach problems. At the very beginning, she talks about how like, oh, maybe I'm getting an ulcer. You know, I took milk of magnesium. I've also got my period. So now I've got cramps too. And just, you know, my abdomen's in hell. And as someone who's been there a lot and has stress related stomach issues and stuff like that, including had a flare up recently, Maud's like, I got drunk and then puked a lot and decided it was a religious experience and imagined myself levitating. I found that extremely plausible. And all of the moments where we see what she's experiencing and it's what looks like something a bit supernatural is happening, it's always limited enough that it's just extremely plausible to me that somebody in her mental, emotional, and physical condition, and the physical being a big part of it too, because when she talks about what it feels like when God talks to her, because God only talks to her toward the end of the movie. Amanda asks her earlier on, like, so you talk to God all the time. Does God talk back? And she describes God's response as being physical feelings she has. It's not that she actually hears God until she's like way off the deep end at the very end. So one of the things I really liked about it is how much it puts us in her perspective and how plausible I found it was. And it's like, I mean, is it a story of mental illness? Sure. Obviously, like she needs some help, but I don't think it's necessarily a movie about somebody who's, say, schizophrenic or something like that to explain the hallucinations. She only starts having those hallucinations when she crosses a certain threshold that I think anyone wouldn't necessarily have to have schizophrenia or another condition like that might cause them to have hallucinations, to have the kind of mild hallucinations that she has when she's past this point of just trauma, distress, despair, suicidality, paired with this kind of real physical pain of different sorts. And I just, I like that a lot. I had some point to make about what you said, but I'm spacing on it, Alanah, about the something good that gets warped and twisted, or something supposedly good. I realize that does kind of segue into, I think, some of the stuff we wanted to talk about religion or gods or the divine or whatever you want to call it, spiritual content in both of these films. But if Sean or Alanah, you want to talk more about that, I'm not trying to hustle us along.
No, I mean, I do agree that, like, I think the film's perspective is that she's hallucinating. I think that, I think it starts somewhat like, ambiguous, and I think it's not really until like clear or like there's not really a strong moment, I think, of like, no, it's not really happening until the very end. I think that's when what they save it for. I think you can have a question about it for most of the film, and like, oh, is it happening? Oh, is it not? And then Yeah, and I think I've mentioned this before on the show, is that like there's the question of whether or not something is happening as far as a character is concerned. For her, for Maud, obviously all these things actually happened. Outside of Maud, they didn't happen, but for her, it's all as real as anything else. And I do tend to land on the side for things in a film of, well, if you see it in the film, it happened even if it didn't happen. Like it happened for the character. If the character's having a mental breakdown and these things happen, but the observable reality outside of them, other people don't experience it, doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means it only happened for that one person. Because sometimes you'll get into those arguments or discussions with people, what really happened in the movie? And I'm like, well, it all really happened. It's just who did it happen to and who did it not happen to, which also just kind of plays off of psychology in general, is that objective reality is important, but it's important when you're talking to somebody who is having maybe a break from reality or interprets things drastically different from you do, which I've had a few friends in my life where they had that situation. Is like, you can't just like, it's just as real for them as literally anything else for anybody else. So it happened. Even if it didn't happen, it happened. So yeah. And I think, yeah, I think we can. Where did you want to go with the religious stuff, Nicole? You said you were going to.
There was an article I pulled just earlier today, actually, because I wanted to see what people out there were saying about Maud's relationship to God and how a kind of religious fanaticism is portrayed in Saint Maud. I was shockingly unable to find any materials that discussed both these movies together, let alone about the, divine intervention, faith element of them. But I'm not familiar with this writer, but I found a piece on Medium by somebody named Jared Corvin, in an article called Bad Faith in St. Maud, How Horror Cinema Came to Fear the Preacher, which also talks about Midsommar a little bit, as well as some other films. And he saw a trend of, I think he called it religiophobia, I think is the term he used, in film, that he saw both Midsommar and St. Maud as kind of being a part of, albeit in different ways. And he spoke about some other films as well. And he kind of pointed to how it used to be that in horror movies, the church was something that fought evil, like in The Exorcist or any number of vampire movies where crosses or etc. But that there's a recent trend in which the church is now the source of evil as opposed to the counter to it. And he said the darkening of religion, meaning in film, has less to do with the church and more with attitudes towards people of faith. And he goes into a little bit more depth and specifics, but I don't know that I agree with that. I'm just going to say, I know how Sean feels about it. I'd love to hear how you feel about it, Alanah. And we can read a couple more of these quotes. Well, yeah, actually, we can talk about it. I'll save my thoughts for a moment. But would either of you like to talk about that? We can also draw on some of the other things he said.
Yeah, I think I do wonder how much it is actually about religion as much as it's about any sort of really intense organized belief that cannot be proven or disproven. So, for example, QAnon is not actually a religion, but I think it kind of terrifies people just how many people are convinced that JFK Jr. is still alive, which is for some reason important to people outside of his family and loved ones, obviously. Or even like the insurrection. Like, I think it's more that people are very, very scared that people can take something such as patriotism or a love of their country or democracy and turn it into something violent. And especially with the internet and the way that information, whether verified or unverified, can spread very, very quickly and gather people very, very quickly. I think that is what maybe he's referring to more than religion, if that makes sense. Because I even think of something, what was the movie I was thinking of? Damn it, I lost it. But I'll just use Midsommar again as an example of like, yeah, it's a religion, but it's mostly about like the physical things that they do to people rather than their beliefs that they have. Because I think if they just went on believing in their gods without bothering anyone, people would just kind of be like, all right, whatever. But the fact that like there needs to be an act of violence in order to practice their religion, or acts of violence, I think that's what freaks people out, is this idea of getting enveloped into something that you don't necessarily want to get enveloped in. I mean, even at the end of St. Maud, like, those poor people that had to watch that woman burn alive at the beach, they're probably all traumatized for a very, very long time. Or even, you know, poor Olivia Newton-John with that guy that committed those heinous acts that probably required a lot of therapy, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, I mean, I think, you know, I mostly just skimmed the article and I looked at the quotes because it was one of those ones that kind of started irritating me. Because, like, this whole thing, because, well, part of one of the quotes, well, yeah, no, it's that one that you read, the one with the attitudes towards people of faith. Like, it's one, it smacks a little bit of the, like, oh, us religious people. And when he says religious people, he's really just talking about Christians, because that's a lot of where his examples are coming from. He's like, oh, we're so persecuted, like, people, why don't people love us? We just want to talk about how great God is. And it's like, well, okay. And his article was in 2019 or something, I think was the date on the article. What was it, 2020 or 2021, where they found another school in Canada with the graves of children around it from,
Indigenous
specifically
kids, right?
Yeah, the Indigenous kids, specifically a church-run school. And that is not the first time that has happened. Like, that's the thing that goes back a ways. Like my home state, Alaska, that is a very real part of the history in Alaska. Is I don't think that there was quite as much of the, like, dead kids buried around the school thing, but there was, you know, it's the religion being used in this way, weaponized against people. But also, like, we have, you know, decades of hearing about the Catholic Church moving priests who, again, harmed children. And just like centuries worth of history of religion being either used as an excuse for, or like participating in, or turning an eye, turning away from and allowing to happen, you know, atrocities. And I think it's, you know, this idea of like, oh, well, like, this dark view of religion really doesn't have to do with the church. It's all about, like, you know, people's attitudes towards people of faith is, I feel like it's a disingenuous argument. It's like, we have history of centuries, millennia of people using religion for harm. It's either big things like I was just talking about, or it's small things. You know, part of my view, I admit, comes from, you know, where I grew up. My hometown was largely, I don't pay enough attention to know if they still are, but I assume they still are, was largely negatively affected by that. We have a megachurch. There's a very large Baptist temple that a lot of people attend in my hometown, that also has a school. And, it's very conservative in all the worst ways, homophobic, anti-choice, all of that, like harmful, and very, very actively engaged with politics, and like molded the politics of my hometown, and the whole state in a lot of ways, because my hometown's also the half of the state population of the state lives there. Like, there's little ways in which this is also like negatively affecting people in their day-to-day lives. And I think that, attitudes have shifted. Like, we don't have William Peter Blatty and God, what's his name? The director of The Exorcist. Friedkin, thank you. And William Friedkin going like, oh, we need to get more people to go to church, so let's make a thing that scares them into it with The Exorcist, and, making people be afraid of the devil. Now it's like people grappling with, like, on some level, making films and grappling with their own relationship to the religion, whether that's, they've had a generally negative experience like I have, or they had a negative experience that changed the way they feel about it, or they just read about these things in the news and have to ask themselves, like, is this, like, here's this thing that claims to be good, that claims to be helping people, that want to save your souls, and yet it will also cause this harm. Like, is Maud in her quest to save this woman's soul, her stated quest to save this woman's soul, like, she then subsequently murders her as part of that? That's my take on it.
Yeah. I feel what both of you were saying about that. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to give another little quote from this Jared Corvin article that I think kind of continues the conversation. He said, recent demonic possession films like The Devil Inside and The Nun, full disclosure, I've seen neither of those films, have relied heavily on the idea that faith figures are inherently spooky, not least the latter's titular heroine. Rather than representing salvation, the traditional images of the church have come to signal terror, while the othering of Christianity is not especially surprising, as church attendance and religious education have been in decline for decades. Its sinister turn in the cinematic imagination is two things. First, didn't see either of those films. My understanding, though, is The Nun is part of the Conjuring universe.
Yeah, it started out as like an ancillary character, and then they said, hey, James Wan, this series made a lot of money. Can you make it make some more money? I don't know if that movie is any good or not. I haven't seen it, but that's the gist of it, is it's like the origin story of the spooky nun with the big black eyes and the shitty teeth.
Yeah.
But the idea that the Conjuring universe is in any way, shape, or form othering of Christianity just made my brain implode, because the Conjuring universe is Christian propaganda. Like, we did an episode about this, Sean and I did, where we talked about The Conjuring 3 and Bloodsport as being two films based on, like, the accounts of lying liars who lie about what.
Which is, just to note, in case anybody goes looking for that, it is a Patreon exclusive episode.
Wink,
oh,
wink.
sorry. It is. You have to subscribe to our Patreon to hear what we have to say about The Conjuring 3 and Bloodsport and the similarities between those films. But I'm like, I haven't seen The Nun, but I find it hard to believe that The Nun is a film that's anti-Christian or othering of Christianity, when the whole Conjuring universe is about exactly what Corvin is laying out about how it used to be, where the church and God are the source of light that is fighting the forces of darkness that are the evil. That's what all those movies are. All three Conjuring movies, of which I've seen all of them. And they're the biggest thing. They're one of the biggest things in horror right now. The Conjuring universe is way bigger than Saint Maud. Like, Midsommar was a huge hit. And it's just Midsommar, and whether that's, I mean, that's not about Christianity anyway, but like Midsommar was a huge hit for like A24 or whatever. None of these things are making Conjuring money. So this idea that the new thing in horror is, oh, well, now the church is scary and it used to be the church is good. The church is good is still thriving in horror. So this guy, I think, I'm interested in his perspective, but it's a little like, try being any other religion, like, or not a religion for that matter. Like Christianity's doing okay.
I also think that like this makes me think of my 80-something-year-old Irish immigrant grandma who always talks about how kids can't play outside anymore. For those who are listening, I'm doing air quotes. And my mom always rebuttals with like, no, it's, you know, it was always dangerous for kids to play outside. You just hear about it more and people talk about it more. Like, honestly, I don't know if James Wan went to Catholic school or not, but the nun probably came from the possibility that James Wan or one of the writers or producers or something went to Catholic school and the nuns were mean as hell. My mom told me stories about Catholic school that made my jaw drop to the floor in regards to like what the nuns thought was okay to do to kids. So I think also it's maybe more of like where people are just deciding to not cover things up anymore, like, or maybe not even cover things up, but like own up to the bad as much as the good, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think the other thing that weirds me out about the argument being made in one of the other things that weirds me out about the argument being made in this article is like, I mean, you can read Saint Maud as being a critique of Christianity. Certainly, I think that's supportable. But that's also not really what the film is primarily about. In part, it's weird to view it as like an attack on organized religion when one of the aspects of how Maud's faith is manifesting as so toxic is the fact that she's not actually participating in any organized religion with anyone else. She doesn't go to church. She doesn't have any sort of religious figure that she's getting bad counsel from. There's no, you know, that may be part of her history or whatever, but it's we don't know her exact relationship with Christianity, but it's established that it's a recent conversion that happened after she believed she killed a patient. In her traumatized state, where she no longer had her job that was like her purpose, she thinks that medicine is a noble calling. That obviously gave some meaning to her life, and all of that was taken away. She thinks she killed someone. She apparently has no family she's in touch with, or close friends, or a support network, or anything. She's losing her mind, and she turns to God. And she turns to God not via the church, but just via her own personal special readings of religious texts and relationship to God. And it's interesting because Amanda gives her that book of William Blake paintings. And she reads at one point this quote from William Blake that seems to really resonate with her. She's kind of like, huh, yeah, noted, where he says something about organized religion getting in the way of living a true spiritual life. And Maud is absolutely like a purist about this. She just wants to get down to the bare bones of serving God. Primarily, it appears through pain. And then, if I can save this soul, this will be my one thing. And then when she's not able to actually save Amanda's soul at the end, when Amanda just laughs at her, she sees Amanda as being demonically possessed, experiences her as being demonically possessed, and then kills her, you know, like vanquish the demon type thing. But again, none of that was under the instruction or influence of any religious body. It came from her kind of, as like we were talking before, like going feral by herself, you know, having her own weird, warped take on things. Not that her take isn't supported by, I'm not saying that there aren't organized religious bodies that, you know, support her take on things. I'm not saying that her view of Christianity is necessarily any kind of perversion of Christianity. It's just the particular version that she fell into was very much in part out of her isolation. And it's about, you know, trauma and losing yourself to something when you need something and you don't have any of the things you need around you. So you have to go into a fantasy, much the way Sunny arguably does in Xanadu. But so I just think Saint Maud, which is such a specific portrait of a specific character and how religion plays into her story, to view it as primarily being an anti-Christian film, that feels very off to me. I don't think that's really the main point of the film. I think something like Breaking the Waves, which we talked about on the show, is much more like, oh no, this is a critique of Christianity. This is a critique of the church. That is one of the things that this film is primarily about. This involves that, but it's not a clear-cut point in the same way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I mean, I do think it's I forgot after the first time I watched it, and then I watched it again yesterday, that about the William Blake stuff, because the William Blake stuff is very relevant to Maud specifically, because if I remember right, he had, like, part of what inspired his art and his poetry was that he had sort of similar sort of euphoric and or horrific visions and experiences, and had a very sort of, as you were saying, like, there's that like very personal relationship with the divine that he advocated for. And I think that, there's a definite, like, strong parallel there between him and her, and kind of why she would definitely connect with his art, and she's cutting up some of it and she's doing all that in it.
Making collages.
Exactly. What Alanah, what you were saying about the nuns thing, when I saw that part of the quote, I was and like referring to the nun, I'm like, the number of times I'd heard, like, horror stories about nuns from people who went to Catholic school, like uncles and stuff. Like, it was literal torture, not like, oh, they, they did a few, they wrapped my fingers with a ruler or something like that. Like, literally, I think my uncle had described that at one point he was made to hold books stacked in each hand and squat by a nun.
Yeah,
at school.
That sounds about right. My aunt was caught chewing gum, and she was made to stand in the garbage pail with the gum on her nose the entire class.
That sounds like,
Which is like, I don't want to say tar and feathering, because I saw John Adams and that looks awful, but to a 12-year-old girl, I mean, to anyone really, that's so cruel and not respectful of you as a human being.
Yeah.
No.
And
it's funny.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's funny because this idea that horror dealing with critiquing the church being a new phenomenon, like you guys talking just now, it's like, I rewatched The Devils recently. And yes, that film was suppressed in the 70s. But if you want to watch a horror movie that's actually about the horror of Christianity, watch The Devils. That's what that movie's about. That's not exactly what St. Maud's about. That is about the problem of organized religion, and through the organization and the power that gets consolidated and enacted, the horror that comes from that. But that's not present in St. Maud.
No.
I'm not saying it's contradictory, but it's just not, that's not what it's about.
No.
To add on to that recommendation, I also highly recommend this movie, Witchfinder General, which was one of Vincent Price's movies in the 70s about this guy who was tasked with finding quote-unquote witches and torturing and killing them in any way, shape, or form. And it just shows how not even just evil and cruel, but like people talk about like the banality of evil, and there's this banality of persecution that you see in this movie where people will literally just stand back and watch somebody get tortured for something they may or may not have done in the name of Christianity, specifically in Witchfinder General. So you're right. I don't think that this critique is anything new. I think there might be maybe like a little resurgence of it because we've all been in a pandemic and we've had time to think about things.
And there's a growing Christo-fascist movement in this country seizing power, and the right wing of our political apparatus is becoming increasingly specifically Christo-fascist. So I think the bad side of Christianity is on a lot of people's minds these days because we're seeing it. We're seeing it take over more and more, in some respects in the United States right now. It's interesting that you said the banality of evil, because I think that's how this article actually ends, is by quoting Hannah Arendt and talking about the banality of evil. Yeah. This article, the Jared Coven one, ends talking about a movie that called Apostasy, about a family of Jehovah's Witnesses. I've never seen it, but he liked this one better. He said this one, I guess, because it's critiquing Jehovah's Witnesses instead of something more close to home for him, maybe. I don't know. But he's saying that it's more empathetic. But it says, he does end by saying that something about the ending, the way the moment is rendered, both in the mundane delivery and the sympathetic ears of those listening and thinking about how much of this is worth taking seriously, makes this portrait of a man living in fear of demons all the more disturbing. To channel Hannah Arendt, it is the banality that gives evil its sting. Yeah, I just thought that was interesting. I guess I don't have a point to make.
But it all comes together. It all comes together.
I think, though, that Saint Maud and quite arguably Xanadu also are depictions of the banality of evil that give it its sting.
I was just thinking of that. I was thinking of the Michael Beck character and the banality of his, like, artistic passions, if we're being honest. He just kind of wants to, like, be an artist and be successful. And when there's no, like, active pursuit or active love of something, it is very easy for this higher power, whatever that higher power may be, whether it's a Welsh-speaking god in St. Maud or Olivia Newton-John on his roller skates in Xanadu, it makes it easy for any sort of powerful, seemingly all-knowing entity to come and take your hand and just show you the way, and everything will be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because, as Maud says early in St. Maud, I have no time for creative types as they tend to be self-involved. Which I thought...
It's a good description of Sunny.
When I watched Xanadu right after that, I was just like...
Well, there's a difference between, like, creative types and people that actually are creative professionals, if we're being
right.
honest.
And
I don't know if there is to Maud, though, because I think she would see that also as being, like, very superficial and, whereas to save a soul, now that's quite something. As she puts it. And then as we discussed, in terms of the degree of, like, the to whatever degree the film's a critique of Christianity, that mostly to me came out actually in that binary of, like, I'm either going to save your soul or I'm going to kill you. If I can't save your soul, I'm going to fucking kill you. And I'm like, that's, that speaks to some situations beyond Maud herself. Definitely. And that, is one of the brutal, but absolutely believable aspects of the film, and viewing Maud as a part of a certain kind of toxic Christian apparatus, however much she may not be going to church herself. Like, she's still behaving in what she sees as being the righteous way, which is in keeping with what many figures have seen. The film was originally inspired apparently by Joan of Arc in part.
Oh,
and,
interesting.
And Rose Glass trying to imagine what a young woman like that, how she would be received today, who felt she communicated with God. There's a million differences between Joan of Arc and St. Maud. I don't want to overstate that, but it is interesting. And it's funny because Sean and I worked together actually on a Joan of Arc project that I directed some years ago. That was part of an anthology film called Bring Us Your Women, that all the filmmakers were making these different little short films based on these songs written by composer Catherine Capozzi about different female figures throughout history, a lot of divine figures and things like that, songs inspired by them. And I did one about Joan of Arc, and my take on her was not about her as somebody who erroneously thought she spoke to God, but rather as somebody who was tapped into a larger righteous cause that she was willing to sacrifice herself for, and was also trying to be a leader within against all odds and things like that. But, it is also true that many people have speculated that Joan of Arc may have been schizophrenic, or maybe she wasn't schizophrenic, but was hallucinating and not, was experiencing mental health issues of a sort that were not understandable or legible in her time, and were interpreted as being a connection to God. I'm just throwing that out there as something Rose Glass said, not something I have a big point to make about Saint Maud relating to.
But that makes sense. I think, because I think it also kind of plays into, like, not necessarily what this guy was talking about, but just kind of in general that there are things that happen now, incidents with people, this Michael Owen Perry or something like that, where I think if we were 100, 200, 500, 1,000 years ago, they would be interpreted very differently, and there would be a different, like, path for that person necessarily, because, like, we have stories, whether they're true or not, from religious texts of, people having experiences that were that were fantastical, or they saw this thing, they taught, burning bushes and wheels covered in eyes in the sky, or whatever else that you can find weird shit in the Bible. Now when that when if somebody comes with that, says that they're seeing these things, we have a different interpretation of it, because we have more information about how the brain works, and more information about how we're processing things. We have psychology, and we have medicine, and a slightly better view of how the brain works, or when it's going awry, I guess. So that, like, a lot of things that would have traditionally been interpreted as some sort of religious fervor or religious experience are now hopefully being treated as, like, oh, you're having a full-on break from reality that's actually dangerous for you and people around you. We have some medication for that, or we have other kinds of therapy for that. I don't think it always works out all that well for everybody, but, like, we definitely have ways that we deal with that. And, I think that manifests sometimes in the stories that we're telling, and that, like, let's take Joan of Arc, and then let's take what happened with her and put it in a modern context. And then what we get is probably somebody who's not doing well, mentally ill, or, otherwise there isn't, like, an appropriate path for what she wants to do. Joan of Arc gets to lead troops for her god, and her killing people is all sanctioned. Maud, not so much. So same with, even in realistic senses, somebody like Michael Owen Perry at some point probably just would have joined some religious order that allowed him to, fight for his God and do the thing that he thought he was supposed to do for his God. I think we just have this sort of evolving, maybe not necessarily changing, evolving view on how people engage with reality that honestly ends up, on purpose or not, being critical of what we had in the past. But yeah, it just ends up being critical because it was, because it's different. like, because it's not interpreting it the same way as it would have been interpreted before, I think.
But then again, it raises the question on the part of whom, though, because we're a very divided nation right now. People got a lot of different perspectives.
I think we're a divided world, if we're being honest. I think we're kind of like getting to mod levels of isolation in our existence, especially since the pandemic kind of like facilitated that isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And a lot of the people who are like very upset about the secularization of society and want to, like, there's always a religious right push happening, at least throughout my entire lifetime, and especially like starting in the 90s when the Christian right like really started getting their shit together and being like, you know, and the Promise Keepers came out, and like all these organizations that started that's not to digress too much, but this has been a constant throughout my life. But right now, like, those people are ready for holy war.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're in it as far as they're concerned. It's happening now, and some of the battlegrounds of that include things like mental health care, for example, and psychiatry. Like, and I mean, I just heard a story about a kid who died in an exorcism like about a month ago, I think in California or something. Like, these things are still here with us. And, you know, the ebb and flow, the backlash to the secularization, the backlash to, you know, the mainstreaming of mental health care after, you know, obviously in around World War II with the rise of fascism in the last century, that in part involved a massive backlash to psychiatry and developments in research on mental health and things like that, and psychology, like literal burning of books in libraries and research and all of that, wiping out research that had been done, for instance, on, you know, transgender people, for example, and things like that, that kind of like set things back in a way that a lot of where we're at now, that's like, oh, we're so evolved in 2020, we know what's up. We could have been there a lot earlier had it not been for an actual fascist campaign against those things, which is also happening again right now. So we're seeing some of those currents and trends and conflicts repeating, you know, just to wrap things up on a super happy note. So, you know, it may be, we may have presidential candidates soon running on the like roller skate into a wall to be with the Muses platform. I don't know. Stranger things have happened this year.
Honestly, yeah. I wish I could be like, nah, it's fine. No one's gonna roller skate into walls. I'm like, no, they probably will.
That would be one of the better things they could do, honestly, though. Like, if that's what you're gonna do, okay. Just, you know,
just like
don't stab
Biden
someone.
skating out to the presidential debate booth.
Oh God,
I can see it now with the like
the blue headband
with the glow.
Oh, the glow
with
thing.
The glow and the blur.
Oh,
can we just add that glow and blur to everything? It would make things better. Sean, you can do it. You know how to do that.
I know how to do it. I'll make it happen.
One thing we didn't talk about enough, though, I do have to say, is the Don Bluth animated sequence, which was added both because they can't show him fucking, apparently, in a family movie, and two, because the movie was just not feature length. So they're like, you know what's cheaper than reshoots? Let's get Don Bluth. He hasn't made Secret of Nim yet.
I thought there was also something along the lines of like, the main character was supposed to sing a couple of songs with Olivia Newton-John, but because Michael Beck couldn't sing, they had to like retool the film a little bit, and that song they played over the animation was supposed to be like his big solo.
Oh, that's
I might be
fun.
conflating that with, because in the musical, Cheyenne Jackson is the guy that originates Sunny on Broadway, and that's his song is Don't Turn Away.
Okay.
And he can sing.
Yeah, and
he's a singing person. Why they cast this tool? I mean, I get why John Travolta was like, no thanks. Apparently, though, also Mel Gibson was in the cards.
There was a couple people who were up for it.
Because he can't sing.
No, he
can't. But they can always do the Bollywood thing of like, there's the actor that does the acting things, and then like everyone's totally fine with the fact that someone else will be doing the singing that the actor lip syncs to.
I would be fine with that. Marion Cotillard didn't do her own opera singing in Annette, and that didn't bother us.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole plot of Singing in the Rain, or a big part of the plot of Singing in the Rain, with Gene Kelly.
Which has Gene Kelly in it.
Exactly.
We should do Singing on the Rain with something.
We should.
On the show.
We should always do Singing in the Rain.
It's a great movie.
It is. It's beautiful.
As were these two movies in their own ways.
Yeah.
Well,
Weirdly enough, yeah.
They really, I have to say, for anyone listening at home, I literally did watch them as a double feature last night, and it worked very well. I had Saint Maud first, that was a little more intense, and then you just had this palate cleanser of Xanadu. And
good order.
And it brought a lot of coherence to Xanadu, because if you don't have something like that you're trying to compare it to, you might be completely lost and just floating off in space with the muses.
They also both take place by the ocean or by the sea.
Oh, that's true.
There's beach stuff going on. Important scenes of the beach. So
actually both movies they don't both end, but Xanadu starts at the beach and Maud ends at the beach.
So if you watch Saint Maud and then Xanadu together, then you're going from one beach to another beach, and it's just a flow. Just like go from one to the next. It's great.
They did it that way on purpose.
Totally.
They knew. God
Saint
told
Maud
them.
actually unofficial. Yeah, you told them so that they could make, Saint Maud be like a low-key unofficial sequel to Xanadu.
Exactly.
Most people don't know that. You may have heard that here first.
Kira appeared to Rose Glass and was like, "Yo, end on the beach, dude."
And Rose Glass is like, after having been like, "I just wish I could do my art and get paid to not work my easy job." I guess much like it was, Sonny's calling to make Club Xanadu, it was Rose Glass's to make a sequel to Xanadu. The more you know.
A 4MC exclusive.
This is what we bring you. This is what we do for you.
The good stuff.
So much. The good stuff. We got it. Well, we sure talked about these movies.
We did. We spoke about
some problems today. I think we did.
Yeah, I think we did. I think the world's a better place now.
A little bit. Just a little bit.
Silence that just hung over.
Like if anybody goes looking after the episode and starts looking around going like, is the world actually better? They're gonna be disappointed. It's just a tiny little bit. It's like maybe not super noticeable.
Well, then what they can do is they can just tear up whatever they were working on and throw it out the window, and maybe, just maybe, it will start glowing and find its way across the highways and byways of the land to the correct mural to animate a muse to come help you find your path.
There you go.
So that's what I recommend to you. Just whatever you're doing, whatever paper you were last working on anything on, maybe you were doing some simple math, maybe you were doodling, maybe you were taking some notes on a movie for a podcast, whatever it is,
painting.
Tear that shit up. Throw it out the window. That's the only way to be free and find your true calling.
Throw anything that you're working on out the window. It doesn't have to just be paper. Like
it can be
if
a
it's
granite
bonus
sculpture.
Points, the heavier it is, the more inspiration will be returned to you.
Exactly.
Oh goodness.
Where can people find
gracious.
you, Alanah?
People can find me on my official website, Alanah-Rafferty.com. They can also find me on Instagram at Alanah Rafferty, and my podcast's Instagram is at Girl Presses Play as well.
And
Check that out. If you enjoy our show, you may very well enjoy Alanah's show as well. And you can also find Alanah very, very soon in the next 4 Mile Circus film reveal, in which she plays the humorously named Katie is also the name of the character. In a lot of places. Also an unofficial Saint Maud sequel reveal, upcoming 4 Mile Circus production.
Makes sense, actually.
Kind of is.
A little bit.
Kind of is a little bit. You'll see what we mean by that as soon as it's out, which hopefully will be around the time maybe even this podcast is, but we'll see. But until then, thanks, Alanah, and thank you for listening.
This was so much fun.
To Zeus and the muses and God.
To Gene Kelly, to Don Bluth.
Definitely to Gene Kelly and Don Bluth. Those two are, always alive in my heart. I think Don Bluth is still alive in the world.
I think
also.
he is.
Sorry, that sounded
I think
weird.
so too.
I didn't read that. But Gene Kelly, R.I.P. lives on in our heart. Weird final performance for Gene Kelly to have it be Xanadu, but man still got it.
He still had it.
Yeah.
Smooth.
He really
The way
did.
he moves is great. I liked it. All right. Bye.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
The Celluloid Mirror is a 4 Mile Circus production hosted by Nicole Solomon and Sean Mannion. Our theme music is Twisted by Kevin MacLeod. You can hear more from Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.filmmusic.io. Please take a few moments to rate and review the Celluloid Mirror on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps with discoverability. If you have questions or comments about what you heard on the show or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to email us at info@4milecircus.com or seek us out on social media. We are at 4 Mile Circus on Twitter and Instagram. Want more from the Celluloid Mirror, Sean and Nicole? Join our Patreon at patreon.com/4milecircus. You'll get early access to episodes, uncut video of our recording sessions, access to our Discord server, and much more. To learn more about everything we do, visit us at 4milecircus.com.
I ended up in that hall of mirrors. There was another girl. She looked like me. Exactly like me.
Can you come with me in my dreams?
That'll do, baby.
What happens when the story dies? The evil is set free.
I have to return some videotapes.